Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I will bring you the case of Dr. Death. One day, a high school girl got in a road accident and was admitted to a hospital. She was recovering from her injuries when, suddenly and mysteriously, she died under Dr. Michael Swango's care. Michael Swango was an American physician who had inexplicable deaths follow him wherever he practiced. He killed dozens of people, including his lover. He was obsessed with poison and death and would eventually flee the country to continue killing. Dr. Michael Swango, also known as Dr. Death, is a name that sends shivers down the spine of anyone in the medical community familiar with his story. Michael Swango was a licensed physician turned serial killer who exploited his medical expertise not to heal but to harm. This is the story of a rogue doctor who turned into a serial killer. Michael Swango was born on October 21, 1954, in Tacoma, Washington, to his mother Muriel and his father John Swango. As the middle child in a family of three, Michael grew up primarily in Quincy, Illinois. Michael's father, John, was a career U.S. Army officer who served in the Vietnam War and was listed in Who's Who in the government for the years 1972 to 1973. However, John Swango's life, even though it seemed idyllic, was very much hardened by the struggle with alcohol use disorder and depression, which started after he returned home from the Vietnam War and subsequently led to his divorce from Mikhail's mother, Muriel. Very early in his life, Mikhail was recognized by his mother as the most academically gifted of the three children. Mikhail attended Quincy Catholic Boys High School, where his intelligence really began to shine brightly. He was the valedictorian of his 1972 class. After graduating from high school, he enlisted in the Marine Corps, completing his recruit training at the Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. Michael had a strong commitment to physical fitness. In 1980, he was honorably discharged from the Marines, and he began attending Quincy University in Illinois. On campus, Michael was always seen jogging or performing calisthenics. Interestingly, he would do push-ups as a form of self-punishment after receiving criticism from any of his professors, which seems rather odd. His intelligence was evident again during his career at Quincy. He graduated second in his class and received the American Chemical Society Award. Michael's journey into the medical field began at the Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Here, Michael began to exhibit very disturbing behavior. Although a brilliant student, he developed a bizarre and disturbing fascination with patients who were dying, which became evident when he chose to work as an ambulance attendant, preferring this role over his studies. Oddly enough, a significant number of patients assigned to Michael during this time suffered life-threatening emergencies or died. At least 5 of his patients died during this period. Michael, completely disregarding his studies and focusing on working in the ambulance, along with his bizarre obsession with dying patients, eventually caught up to him. He was almost expelled from medical school. 1 month prior to his scheduled graduation, it was discovered that Michael was faking his checkups during OB/GYN rotations. This wasn't the first time complaints and concerns were raised regarding Michael's medical competence and his potential ability to practice medicine in this field. Previously, several students and faculty members expressed doubts about Michael's ability to practice medicine. Despite all this, Michael was given a second chance and allowed to graduate a year later than his peers. He graduated in April of 1983, and by July, Michael secured a job as a medical resident in the internship program at Ohio State University Hospital. This internship was supposed to be followed by a residency in neurosurgery, but it wasn't long into Michael's internship until his patients began to die under mysterious circumstances. Nurses eventually reported seeing Michael inject unknown substances into patients' lines, who would later become ill, and some of them died. But the nurses were accused of being paranoid. Despite other internal complaints, an investigation cleared Michael of any wrongdoing. However, Michael's residency offer was eventually rescinded due to poor performance. Ohio State feared that Michael would sue them if he was fired without cause. Ohio State decided to quietly rescind his residency after his internship ended. Within a year that Michael spent in Ohio for his internship, 7 patients died under his care, and one of his patients was 19-year-old Cynthia. Cynthia was attending the University of Illinois on a gymnastics scholarship when she was hit by a car while walking near campus. Cynthia, who was from Ohio, was being treated at the Ohio State University Hospital. While her injuries were severe, she was stable until Michael took over her care. Some days later, Cynthia passed away. Because Michael's residency was rescinded, it was very easy for him to transition into another role in medicine. After losing his residency, he moved back to Quincy, Illinois. In July 1984, he began working as an EMT with the Adams County Ambulance Service. While working there, medics on staff noticed that whenever Michael brought in food for the team or made coffee, his colleagues would suddenly, inexplicably become violently ill. Michael was arrested by Quincy police in October of 1984 after they found arsenic as well as several other poisons in his possession. On August 23, 1985, Michael was convicted of aggravated battery, surprisingly not attempted murder. He was sentenced to 5 years. After this incident, the dean of Ohio State's law school publicly reviewed their medical school's failure in their lackluster, to put it kindly, investigation into the nurses' complaints against Michael and Michael's behaviors during his internship. Additionally, prosecutors in Franklin County, where Ohio State is located, also considered charging Michael with attempted murder. Still, they ultimately decided against it due to a lack of physical evidence. Michael was released in 1989, and afterward, he held various jobs in Newport News, Virginia. These were random jobs, including a counselor at the State Career Development Center and a lab tech. While working as a lab tech, Michael met and fell in love with a nurse from a local hospital named Kristen Kenny. The two eventually got engaged. At this point, several of Michael's co-workers from his time as a lab technician suffered from severe and persistent stomach issues, leading many to seek medical attention. Working as a lab technician wasn't fulfilling enough for Michael, and he desired to return to clinical care. In 1991, Michael changed his name to Daniel J. Adams and used forged documents to apply for a residency program at Ohio Valley Medical Center in West Virginia. Although unsuccessful in this attempt, he managed to successfully jumpstart his medical career again in July 1992. He began working at Stanford Medical Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, by falsifying his criminal record from the Illinois Department of Corrections. To achieve this, he claimed to be convicted of a misdemeanor, serving 6 months for getting into a fight with a coworker. Thus, he was able to falsify the documents to reflect this narrative. He then additionally forged what's known as a restoration of civil rights letter from the governor of Virginia, stating that he restored Michael's right to vote and serve on a jury. This was based on several reports that he received from friends and colleagues of Michael, stating he led an exemplary lifestyle and did not commit any crime after that misdemeanor. Committing fraud worked in Michael's favor, and he was able to obtain a residency at Stanford. Here, he excelled at the medical center, unlike any other place he worked. Michael created a really good reputation at Stanford. However, his past eventually caught up to him when he intelligently tried to join the American Medical Association. The American Medical Association ran a background investigation that was more intense and thorough than the hospitals when hiring a resident. During the investigation, the American Medical Association figured out that his record involved poisoning. Once Stanford Medical Center caught wind of this, they fired him. Kristen, Michael's partner, started suffering from very painful and intense migraines after he was fired from Stanford. The migraines, along with what had happened to Michael, gave Kristen pause, so she went back home to Virginia. Once she returned to Virginia, her migraines stopped. The American Medical Association continued to track Michael to see what he was doing. We all know that the American Medical Association, or any other of these associations, is insanely corrupt. They're all for profit. The American Medical Association covered this insane trail of death, poisoning, and a lot of messed up things at the hand of this resident, Michael, who has now worked not only as an ambulance attendant, but also in 2 residencies at 2 different highly regarded medical centers. They don't want their reputation going bad, so they keep quiet forever. They don't report this to the authorities. The American Medical Association lost track of Michael, and he was able to get into a psychiatric residency program at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York. Michael's first rotation was in the internal medicine department at the Medical Center for Veterans Affairs. Like clockwork, people began to die inexplicably under his care. Not long after this, Michael's fiancée, Kristen, who moved to New York to be with him, died by suicide on July 15, 1993. Arsenic was found in her system. The question arises, after what happened at Stanford, why would Kristen stay with Michael? As a reminder, there were no criminal charges ever brought against him. He forged documents regarding his conviction and what the charges were. So Kristen was another one of Michael Swango's victims. Kristen's mother was absolutely horrified by Michael's history, especially after the death of her daughter, so she contacted one of Kristen's friends, who was a nurse at Stanford. The nurse alerted the dean. The dean then called the dean of Stony Brook, prompting the chair of the psychiatry department at Stony Brook after the conversation with the dean to question Michael about his actual history, particularly about the poisoning. Michael eventually admitted to his poisoning conviction in Illinois. Michael was fired immediately, but after public outrage, the dean at Stony Brook and the head of the psychiatry department were also forced to resign. Thankfully, prior to his resignation, the dean at Stony Brook alerted all of the medical schools and teaching hospitals across the United States about Michael Swango as well as his history. Unbeknownst to anyone, as soon as Michael started his rotations at the VA Medical Center and patients died in his care, the FBI and special agent in charge of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Bruce Sackman, were honing in on Dr. Death. In 1994, a warrant was obtained for Michael Swango's arrest. But unfortunately, Michael fled the USA, and in September 1994, he settled in Zimbabwe, Africa, where he again used fraudulent documents to get a job at Mission Hospital. Michael's patients began dying, and thankfully, much more quickly than any instance in the United States, the medical director suspended him immediately. Michael became upset by this and hired a lawyer to fight his suspension. While this all was going on, he was pleading to volunteer until the investigation was complete. But thanks to a surgical resident, this was absolutely vetoed. This resident saw Michael in the ICU acting strange and suspicious, wandering around trying not to be seen. This was when Michael was not on a call, so he had no business in the ICU treating any patient. Those resident firmly believed that Michael was linked to the mysterious deaths of several patients at the hospital. Once Michael realized that the investigation wasn't going in his favor, Michael rented a room from a widowed woman who then became ill suddenly after she ate a meal that she cooked for herself and her friend. The woman reached out to a local doctor, and the doctor immediately, based on the symptoms, suspected arsenic poisoning. The local doctor convinced the woman to send her hair samples in for forensic analysis, which were sent out to South Africa, and when they returned, they confirmed very toxic levels of arsenic. This lab result was also sent to the Zimbabwe Republic Police's Criminal Investigation Department, which then sent it to Interpol, which subsequently sent it to the FBI. Michael ran from Zimbabwe to Zambia to Namibia. Michael managed to work again in the medical field temporarily. During this time, he was charged in absentia with poisoning. By March of 1997, Michael had applied for a job at the Royal Hospital in Saudi Arabia. However, while all of this was going on, the FBI, as well as Special Agent Bruce Sackman, were investigating everything he did not only in the United States, but now in Africa. They were able to obtain a search warrant for his arrest for fraud, and Michael was apprehended during his layover at Chicago O'Hare International Airport in June 1997. Not long after, in 1998, Michael was confronted with all the evidence against him. Michael decided to plead guilty to defrauding the government, and he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. However, this was not the endgame for investigations. This was very well done and very strategic on their part. They knew that they could easily apprehend him and get him into custody on fraud charges. Their goal was to continue the investigation while he was safely detained and couldn't continue to harm people and build up the case they needed for subsequent murder charges, which is why they started from fraud. The FBI delved deep into the investigation and obtained records from the United States and Africa, which demonstrated a very scary pattern that Michael exhibited any time he was going to kill or harm a patient. Dr. Michael Swango would enter the patient's room alone, draw the curtains closed, and he would administer a paralytic in lethal doses. Michael would choose a medication called succinylcholine as his weapon of choice. This medication is a very strong paralytic and was ideal for Michael's weapon of choice, since it has a very short half-life of around 5 minutes, and the onset is very rapid, about 60 seconds. Overdose from this can cause rhabdomyolysis, which is a very rapid muscle breakdown that releases muscle fiber into the blood, causing cardiac arrest. This medication is very lethal, very quick, with a quick onset, short half-life. Michael also used a medication called epinephrine, which is similar to adrenaline. An overdose can cause the heart to beat very fast, leading to cardiac arrest. A significant component of Special Agent Bruce's investigation into the 5 deaths at the VA hospital under Michael's care eventually led to the exhumation of the graves of those patients with the permission of the family. With all the evidence gathered from the exhibition and the countless interviews from former colleagues in both the United States and in Africa, combined with Michael's insanely destructive history, there was enough evidence finally for murder charges. On July 11, 2000, a federal criminal complaint charged Michael with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of assault, 1 count of false statements for each mail frauds, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Michael was formally indicted a week later, and he pled not guilty. Michael's lawyer ended up paying him a visit not long after and told him that there was a huge public outrage in Africa to extradite him there for arrest and execution. Michael was offered a deal in exchange for a guilty plea, which meant that he would not be extradited to Zimbabwe. Michael agreed to the deal. On September 6, 2000, Michael pled guilty in the United States District Court in Central Islip, New York. He was 45 years old. When Michael was arrested during his flight from Africa to Saudi Arabia and had his layover in Chicago, the authorities were able to see all of his belongings, which included his diary. On September 6th, after he pleaded guilty, the Assistant United States Attorney read from Michael's diary. In his diary, he copied several passages from various books that he read and enjoyed. So the United States Attorney read from a few selected passages, and they were all very telling. But the one standing out is, "When I kill someone, it is because I want to. It's the only way I have of reminding myself that I am still alive." When it was Michael's turn to address the court, he admitted to some of the murders he had committed. Michael said, "I did this by administering a toxic substance which I knew was likely to cause death. I knew what I did was wrong." Michael was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He is currently being held as a prisoner at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, which is a supermax federal prison in Colorado. It is informally known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. According to the FBI, Michael Swango is suspected of poisoning and killing between 35 to 50 people between the United States and Africa. While Michael's intentions were never truly identified, he did keep a scrapbook filled with clippings from magazines and newspapers about various natural disasters, all of which resulted in the deaths of many people. Sadly, while this happened a few decades ago, this is something that still goes on today. Michael Swango's ability to move from one hospital to another, leaving a trail of death and suffering, was almost entirely due to the systematic failure and reluctance to believe that a doctor or another clinician could be capable of willingly murdering their patients.